year was January 2019, and the winter was bitterly cold. I worked as an ambulance driver for a private hospital, often transporting dead bodies to different districts. One day, I received a phone call and went to the office, where I was informed that I had to transport a dead body to Rajshahi. When I saw the body, I realized it had suffered a terrible accident. It was the body of a young woman, probably a college or university student. One side of her head was crushed, her hair was disheveled, and blood was oozing from multiple parts of her body. Since she lived in a hostel, she had no guardian present. A few of her teachers and classmates helped load the body into the ambulance. I had to make the journey alone. Normally, when I transport bodies over long distances, I take my helper, Roki, along. So I decided to take him with me. It was around evening when we set out. After driving for 4 to 5 hours, we stopped at a roadside place to eat. After eating, we resumed our journey. A few kilometers ahead, suddenly, a tire burst. I got out and checked. It was indeed a flat tire. Looking for a spare, I realized that I had mistakenly not brought one. Roki said, "Brother, since we don't have a spare tire, let me go back to the place where we ate and see if we can find a replacement." Taking some money and the damaged tire, Roki left. I parked the ambulance on the roadside and started wondering how long it would take. The place was eerily quiet. Occasionally, a district bus would pass by with a loud roar. Other than that, there was no sign of any human presence. It was around 10 p.m. on the highway. I lit a cigarette and took slow drags, thinking about the tire. I glanced at the rearview mirror, looking in the direction Roki had gone. Suddenly, my eyes got stuck on something inside the mirror. I froze. Shifting my gaze away, I turned around to check. There was nothing unusual. Everything seemed fine. But when I took another drag from the cigarette and looked at the rearview mirror again, I became paralyzed with fear. The dead girl had sat up inside the ambulance. I was too terrified to turn my head. I felt like my teeth were clenching against each other in fear. Suddenly, from behind, the girl spoke, "Brother, can I have some water? My throat is burning with thirst." Unwillingly, I turned around. She was indeed sitting up, and all the wounds on her body had vanished. She looked completely normal, as if she had just regained consciousness. Again, she pleaded, "Brother, I'm really thirsty. Please give me some water." For some reason, all my fear disappeared at that moment. Since she looked so normal, I handed her a bottle of water. She grabbed the bottle and drank it in one gulp. Then she sighed with relief. At that moment, a thought crossed my mind. Our medical system had declared an unconscious but living girl as dead and loaded her into the ambulance. As I was processing this, the girl turned toward me and started speaking. "Brother, I was dying of thirst for just a sip of water. My university was closed for vacation, so I was heading home. I reached the bus stand and got off a rickshaw. After paying the fare, I stepped forward, not realizing that a speeding bus was approaching me. In the blink of an eye, the bus hit me. I fell forward, and before the driver could brake, the left side of the bus ran over my head. My entire body was crushed multiple times under the tires. Even after the accident, I was alive for quite some time. I wanted to scream for water, but I couldn't. My throat was too dry. I cried and begged for water silently, but no one could hear me. No one gave me a single drop of water. By the time someone finally tried to pour water into my mouth, my soul had already left my body. The water trickled down my lifeless cheeks instead of going down my throat. Then they put my body in your ambulance. They found my university ID card and contacted my teachers and friends. They are the ones who placed me in your vehicle to take me home." She paused for a moment, then said, "Brother, please tell my parents and siblings not to cry for me. And thank you. Thank you so much for giving me water." With these words, she lay back down. Just then, Roki returned and said, "Brother, let's go. The issue is fixed." I was still staring at the back. Roki tapped me on the shoulder, breaking my trance. I snapped back to reality and realized my whole body was drenched in sweat. Without saying a word, I helped him put the tire back on, and we resumed our journey. We reached the girl's home around 9 a.m. the next day. As soon as her parents and siblings saw her body, they broke down in tears. I couldn't stay there for long. I didn't share a word of what had happened with anyone. I started the ambulance and began my return journey to Dhaka. As I reached the same spot where the tire had burst the previous night, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. The girl was standing by the roadside. She smiled beautifully and waved goodbye to me. Strangely, instead of fear, I felt a sense of peace. With a relieved heart, I continued my journey back to Dhaka. I was not afraid, but even today, this mysterious incident still haunts my thoughts. Let's move on to the next incident. Since childhood, I have been a bit of a restless person, easily mingling with everyone. At that time, I was a fifth semester diploma student, moderately good looking, and any girl would like me. However, none of them could maintain a friendship with me for more than a month or two. On December 26, 2020, I met a girl on Facebook. As I mentioned earlier, my relationships never lasted more than a couple of months, but this time, the opposite happened. Without realizing it, I started liking the girl after meeting her in person, and we began talking regularly. It's worth mentioning that I studied in a polytechnic college in one district, while the girl lived in another. Meanwhile, my fifth semester exams began. After the exams, I started pressuring her to get married. She informed her family, and I told mine. While my family agreed, hers did not, so we decided to elope. She told me that when the time was right, she would leave home. 4 months passed, and a month before my sixth semester exams, she suddenly called and said, "I am at Mawagat. Come and get me." Without overthinking, I took a younger friend from my hostel and another friend and went to pick her up. We went straight to my house. Since my family had already accepted our relationship, they arranged our marriage. Things were going well. My mother took her family's contact number and informed them about our location. The next day, her family showed up at our house. I was completely shocked. How did this happen? How did they find out? My mother later told me that she had invited them. They were furious at us for getting married without their knowledge. After much discussion, when they failed to convince her to return home with them, they had a meal and left. She stayed at our house for about a month. When it was time for my exams, I returned to my college. I'm explaining everything so that you can understand the situation better. A few days after I left, Ramadan began. On the first day of fasting, my mother called and said that her family had finally accepted everything. I thought, Alhamdulillah, this is great. They started communicating with me. On the 7th day of Ramadan, my mother called again and said that my aunt-in-law and her son had come to take my wife home. They said that after my exams, my father and I should go there to bring her back. I was hesitant and said, "No, she can't leave until I come home." After much persuasion, I agreed to let her go for 7 days. They accepted this condition and took her with them. This is where the real trouble began. The next day, they didn't call me. Worried, I called in the afternoon to check if she had reached home safely. What I heard next shocked me to the core. My wife told me, "You used me. Never call me again." I was in disbelief. How could she say something like that? She used to depend on me for everything. Before I could process it, her mother took the phone and said, "I won't let you go. I will ruin your life." I hung up and immediately called my mother. She answered in a trembling voice and said, "Your wife humiliated me and your mother-in-law." I was stunned. What was happening? Then my mother said that they had made it clear that my wife would never be allowed back into our home again. I was so furious that I couldn't think straight. I didn't say anything. I realized they wouldn't return my wife to us. I hung up and lay down. At that moment, I wasn't worried about anything bad happening to me. Just then, someone knocked on my door. I said, "It's open," but no one responded. I felt a little uneasy. I thought maybe someone was playing a prank, but then I remembered I was alone in the hostel. My roommate was taking an exam, and others were out. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination. Since I had an exam the next day, I tried to study, but I couldn't. Eventually, I lay down and fell asleep without realizing it. In my sleep, I had a terrifying dream. Someone was telling me, "You won't survive. You must die." Then that figure pounced on me. I screamed for help, but no one came. Then suddenly I realized the person attacking me was none other than my wife. I was horrified and shouted, "You!" After that, I remembered nothing. When I woke up, I was lying at my hostel owner's house. My younger friend stood beside me. I asked, "How did I get here?" The hostel owner, who had always been kind to me, was now furious. He simply said, "I don't know," and ordered my friends to take me home immediately. My body ached all over. I told one of my friends, "Take me back to my room." They brought me back, and I asked everyone to leave except for the two friends who had helped me bring my wife home. One of them said, "I'll tell you exactly what happened." He explained, "Your mother called us and told us about the problem at home. When your roommate returned from his exam and didn't find you in the room, he called me. He knew you hadn't gone out with us. Plus, your room's door was open. We all got worried and started looking for you. At first, we thought you were upset and had gone somewhere alone. But when we couldn't reach you by phone, we became more concerned. We searched around the shop area, the garden, and other places. By 8 p.m., we were really worried. We informed the hostel owner and told him everything. We all set out to find you, heading toward the town. Suddenly, someone pointed and said, "There's someone lying over there." When we ran over, we saw it was you. Your eyes were bloodshot and your face was pale. We immediately took you to the hostel owner's house. That's when he got angry and told us to take you home. My friend then added, "Listen, whatever path you're on, turn back now." I was confused. "What path?" he replied. "The addiction you've started." I was completely shocked. "What addiction?" I tried to explain to them, but they wouldn't believe me. That's when I realized why the hostel owner was angry. I became utterly frustrated. What was happening? Was it all a dream? Since then, I felt like someone was always around me. I could sense something. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next day after my exam, I felt extremely unwell. There was nothing I could do. Every afternoon, I would somehow fall asleep, and the same nightmare would return. People around me became distant, assuming I was addicted to something. I even skipped 2 exams. The hostel owner eventually informed my parents. They came, listened to everything, and tried to reason with me. But the hostel owner refused to let me stay there. "I won't keep someone like him in my hostel. He's an addict. It'll ruin my hostel's reputation," he said. My parents tried to find another hostel for me, but no one was willing to take me in. By then, the entire college and town believed I had become a drug addict. My father, losing all hope, took me back home. I told my family everything that had happened, but they didn't believe me. They dismissed it as nonsense. Everyone thought I was an addict. You won't believe the situation I was in. I started feeling utterly helpless. After returning home for 4 days, nothing happened. 5 days into the night, I was on my phone when suddenly I felt something enter through the window. Without thinking much, I closed the slightly open window. A while later, I felt like a girl was standing next to my table crying. I got extremely scared. I turned on the room light, and what I saw, I was not prepared for. I saw my wife standing there crying. Fear made me go cold. I didn't know what to say or whom to call. Words wouldn't come out of my mouth. She suddenly stopped crying and started laughing. She said, "Die, you will die." I couldn't figure out what to do. Suddenly, hearing my mother's voice brought me some peace. I looked up and she was gone. Hearing my mother, I opened the door and saw my mother standing outside. She said, "Your grandmother is very sick. Let's go see her." I said, "Isn't father going?" Mother said, "Your father already left." I looked at my phone and it was around 11:49. Without thinking much, I left with my mother. But instead of going to my grandmother's house, she started walking towards the pond. I should mention that in our area, there is almost no farmland, only ponds. I kept calling my mother while following her. Suddenly, she stopped at the bamboo grove near our house and said, "Do you want to see your grandmother?" Then she gave a terrifying laugh. Seeing my mother act like this, I said, "What's wrong with you, mother? Why are you acting this way?" Then my mother said, "I am leaving you with your wife," and started laughing again. I looked at her in fear, and her face looked terrifying. That was not my mother. I looked back and saw my grandmother. As I stepped back a little, I saw my mother-in-law. I held my head in my hands and sat down. After a while, I realized no one was there. I tried to go back home, but then something else happened. A figure was sitting on top of the bamboo, calling my name. I shivered in fear again. The figure looked like a 10 to 12 feet tall woman. Her long hair was dragging on the ground, and a lot of it was wrapped around the bamboo. I couldn't control myself anymore and lost consciousness. When I woke up, I found myself in my room. I told everyone what had happened. After hearing my story, everyone said I had gone mad because of my wife and was talking nonsense. But my mother believed me. She told my father, but he got very angry and scolded me. Mother told him, "Whether you believe it or not, lock the gate and keep the key with you. Then, even if he wants to go outside, he won't be able to." 2 days later, I regained consciousness. My father still didn't want to believe anything. From that day, I got a severe fever. Even after a week, it didn't get better. I couldn't eat anything. I would vomit. My weight dropped from 68 to 53 kilograms. I became just skin and bones. Seeing this, my mother couldn't bear it anymore and took me to my uncle, who was a traditional healer. He looked at me and said, "Why didn't you bring him earlier? He's almost finished. Give me 2 days. I'll let you know what's happening." We returned home. From that night, I don't remember anything. Let me tell you what my mother said happened next. That night, when your father returned from the market, he went to check on you. But you cursed at him in the worst way. Your father got angry and slapped you. He was about to leave the room when you said in a deep voice, "You hit me? I will die anyway." Father left the room angrily and told me everything. I tried to calm him down and sent him to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I had a dream and woke up. I saw your father was also awake, sitting there. I asked him what was wrong. He said, "I had a dream. Something was saying, 'I will take your eldest son. Let's see how you save him.'" I was shocked and told him, "I had the same dream." Then your father said, "You were right. Tomorrow we are going to your uncle's place." I told him, "I already took our son there. Your brother asked for 2 days. 2 days later, your father and I took you to your uncle's house, but you refused to go. Then suddenly you smiled and said, 'Let's go. Where will you take me? No one can do anything. I will die anyway.' When we arrived, your uncle said something we were not ready to hear. He said, 'Someone has done black magic on him,' but he couldn't say who did it or how. And he couldn't do anything to help because the kind of magic used was beyond his abilities." Your father was frustrated and asked, "Then is there no solution?" Your uncle said he knew a powerful healer who had solved many serious cases. At that moment, you laughed from the next room and said, "Where will you take me?" Then you grabbed your uncle's throat. Your uncle hit your head with something, and you suddenly stopped. We didn't delay anymore and took you to that healer. The healer said, "I don't do these things anymore." But after hearing your uncle's name and your grandfather's name, he said, "My friend's grandson is in trouble. I must help." Then your uncle told him everything and also mentioned that the spirit had said black magic was done on you, but it didn't say who did it. The healer asked us to wait. After 10 to 15 minutes, he returned and said, "Your son got married to a woman, right?" I said, "Yes, but they got divorced." Then the healer said, "Yes, I know everything. Black magic has truly been done on him, and it was done in a very dangerous way." I asked, "Who did this?" The healer said, "I don't know yet, but I will find out." The black magic was done to summon 2 spirits, one harmful and one extremely powerful, to kill him. They used his hair, cemetery soil, and one of his worn shirts. These were placed together and buried with 49 charms after being covered with a goat's blood sacrifice. "Take him home. On the 6th, I will come to your house. Take these 2 charms, tie one on his hand, and place the other at the door." I agreed and asked, "Who did this? And how did they get my son's hair and clothes?" The healer replied, "You will know everything on the 6th. We returned home, but we made a mistake. We lost one of the charms. The healer had already tied one to your hand, so that one was safe. Your uncle said, "He has one charm with him, so nothing will happen. Let's trust in God." At the healer's place, you didn't say a word. But when we got home, after hearing your uncle's words, you laughed out loud and started cursing, saying, "You can't do anything. Go away. I have no problem at all." We thought since you had the charm, there wouldn't be any issues. But we forgot about the second charm. The next morning, you ate normally. But who knew that by noon, something terrible would happen? When I entered your room, I smelled poison. I asked, "What are you doing?" In a deep voice, you replied, "I drank poison. Want some?" Then you started laughing. I screamed, and everyone rushed in. They tried to take you to the hospital, but no one could. By God's grace, 25 to 30 workers were returning home after finishing work. They carried you and took you to the doctor. You were treated and returned home, fully conscious. But the next morning, violent convulsions started again, and you had to be admitted to the hospital once more. Everyone was very worried. I went to take you to the doctor, but no one could understand what had happened or what could be done. The doctors and those around us were scared due to your strange behavior. All of this I heard from your father, who wouldn't let me go. In the meantime, your uncle spoke to the traditional healer, who scolded him for not listening to me and said, "I told you to keep an eye on him. You didn't listen, and you lost the talisman." He then said, "Now, as soon as possible, meet me." When your uncle went to the healer, he gave 2 new talismans and told him to remove the one you had on your hand and burn it, placing the other one under your bed. After doing this, you no longer showed any strange behavior. You didn't speak to anyone. 13 days later, when you got better, the doctor released you, but you still didn't start talking. The people in the neighborhood said you had gone mad because of that girl, that you had poisoned yourself. Anyway, 5 days after your recovery, on November 23rd, the healer came to your room, asked you to sit in a circle, and said, "I can hold it for an hour, but we need a pair of goats, 1 big quantity of sweets, and 3 yards of shroud cloth. Get all these ready in 30 minutes. Your father went to get the sweets and shroud, while your uncle went to buy the goats." 2020. When the healer asked your uncle to sit behind you and told me to sit aside, the spirit was summoned to you. It asked, "Do you want to leave this boy or not? Why are you harming him?" You responded in the girl's voice, saying, "I won't leave until my task is done." The healer then said, "You will leave, and you will tell everything." He then took out some water from the Zamzam well and sprinkled it, after which you threatened, "You can't hold me much longer. You know what will happen if I leave." The healer again sprinkled the water and said, "You will leave, but I will find out from your own mouth who sent you." Despite trying, the healer couldn't anything from you. By this time, your father and uncle had arrived with the required items. It had taken them 40 minutes. The healer immediately instructed your uncle to take some cloth from the shroud, cut it, and tie it over your eyes. He then placed the goat in front of you. The rest of the cloth was used to write your name and something else, and placed over the goat. After that, you started running around wildly. Your uncle swiftly cut the goat's throat, and you collapsed laughing. The healer quickly placed you back in the circle and told your uncle to take you out. The spirit has now been trapped inside the goat, and you won't have any more issues, he assured. After taking you back to your room, we noticed the healer sealed a bottle and said, "The spirit is now confined here. You all are free now, and there will be no more problems with your son." But the story wasn't over yet. Mother asked the healer who had done this to you. The healer instructed everyone to turn off the lights, and then a man dressed in a white robe entered. We all greeted him, and he kindly responded. After a few minutes, your father asked, "Who did this to my son?" The healer answered, "Your son's mother-in-law did it." We were all shocked. The man continued, "Don't misunderstand the girl. She truly loved your son, but her mother had taken control of her. She used her own daughter's hair and your son's shirt to perform the magic. Your son's hair and even his wallet were used by the spirit that tried to kill him." The man then disappeared. The healer said, "It was a jinn, and I kept it with me to control it." After hearing all this, everyone went silent. The healer finished his work, gave a talisman to your father, and told him not to eat beef for 2 months. The healer smiled and said, "It wasn't my fault. I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for my friend's grandson. That's why I intervened." After that, he left, leaving us to watch over you. Hearing all this from Mother, I realized I hadn't liked it before. But why did they feel the need to separate us? There's no evidence left to make any accusations. My father was furious and wanted to cast black magic in return. But my mother said, "What's the point? If they did it, we could do the same, but our son is alive." This is a huge sin. May Allah forgive us. And if anyone has committed a sin, may they be forgiven too. Let's move on to the next incident. Bobby almost noticed that at night, her mother-in-law would suddenly leave their house. But she didn't have enough courage to follow her. They had a pet dog in their house, and it could sense it and would follow her mother-in-law. After leaving the house at night, there would be no news of her for 2 or 3 days. Then from a faraway place, they would get news that she had been found. Then they would go and bring her back. One day she couldn't be found anywhere. As usual, this time they got news that her mother-in-law was lying under a big banyan tree in a faraway village. The entire village had witnessed this incident. Then a religious cleric was brought, and she was taken down from the tree. The whole village had seen this. When the cleric brought her down, the villagers were still present. At that time, Habib's father was abroad. His elder brother was with him, and Habib's middle brother, Sohail, was in Dhaka. Upon hearing about his mother's condition, he returned to the village. One night, after he came back, he heard the dog barking and woke up from his sleep. He saw that his mother was not beside him. The door was open. He took a light and went outside, only to see his mother walking towards the fields along the narrow path between the lands. He called out loudly, "Mother!" and kept calling her again and again. He tried to follow her, but his mother didn't respond at all. And the more Sohail Bai tried to follow her, the further she moved away. At this point, Sohail Bai, being unable to keep up, returned home. A day or two later, they got news that she was found under a big banyan tree in the neighboring village. Then they took her to several spiritual healers, but no solution was found. Among them, one spiritual healer said that this was beyond their ability, that the power of this jinn was too strong. Then Sohail Bai was given the address of a great religious cleric. Sohail Bai brought this great cleric to their house. The cleric observed the house and then declared that their house was a dwelling place of an evil jinn. He told Sohail Bai that they should leave the house as soon as possible, but they didn't pay much attention to his words. Many days passed like this. One night, Sohail Bai noticed that his mother was getting up from the bed and going somewhere. He tried to hold her back, but he wasn't strong enough. His mother pushed him away forcefully and left. Their pet dog followed her as well. Sohail Bai started following her but couldn't find her. However, after going some distance, he saw the dog lying unconscious in the middle of the road. After searching here and there and failing to find his mother, he returned home. The next morning, they found his mother's dead body hanging in the air inside his own uncle's kitchen. The entire village, including us, saw that scene. Believe me, Rasul Bai, her body wasn't hanging from anything. It was floating in the air, just like a body would hang if it were hanged. But there was no rope or anything attached to it. The body was floating about 4 to 5 inches above the ground. The entire village saw this. The police came from the station and brought the body down. Then some imams from our village mosques came and recited verses from the Quran before bringing the body down. The police conducted a post-mortem examination, but the cause of death remained unknown. After that, they performed the funeral bath, prayed the janazah, and took the body to the graveyard. The body was so heavy that no one could carry it to the graveyard. Then the clerics recited prayers, and with great difficulty, they managed to take the body to the graveyard. While burying the body, they faced many obstacles. When they tried to cover it with soil, the soil kept moving away. After much difficulty and prayers, they were finally able to bury her. Even after her death, they could still feel her presence in their house. If you would like to share with us an incident that happened to you or a true ghost story that you know of, please write or record the incident and send it to us by email. Our email address is ghoststreye@gmail.com, ghostsreye@gmail.com. If you would like to share with us an incident that happened to you or a true ghost story that you know of, please write or record the incident and send it to us by email. Our email address is ghoststreye@gmail.com, ghostsreye@gmail.com. If you would like to share with us an incident that happened to you or a true ghost story that you know of, please write or record the incident and send it to us by email. Our email address is ghoststreye@gmail.com, ghostsreye@gmail.com.